You know how sometimes you stumble across an idea that just makes you tilt your head and think, huh, that's interesting?
Definitely happens.
Well, today we're diving into one of those. A listener actually flagged a YouTube video for us by Arawa. It's called Arawa, which translates to creator or God.
Right. And it got us thinking, too.
It really did.
It seems like such a basic distinction, doesn't it? Creator versus God. But as we, explored Pa's thoughts, we realized there's a lot more to unpack than you might first think.
Totally. So, our mission, let's say, for this deep dive is to really try and get a handle on these different perspectives.
And maybe see why teasing apart these terms,
Yeah.
why it might actually matter, how it could shift your understanding a bit.
Okay, so kicks things off with something he noticed, a personal observation. And I think it's something many of us might have just, glossed over.
What was that?
He pointed out that Christian scripture often says God is the creator. And his immediate thought was, okay, why the extra title?
Like redundancy.
Yeah, kind of. If you're the creator, isn't that sort of the ultimate designation? What
Yeah.
does adding God bring to the table? What function does it add?
That's a great starting question.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating how quickly that simple query opens the door to, well, a much broader view of how different traditions see the ultimate source.
Right.
It makes you wonder if creator and God always carry the same weight, or even imply the same kind of being across the board.
And the video, it jumps pretty quickly into some Eastern philosophies, particularly Hinduism.
Yeah, where the creative force, well, it isn't necessarily the one you'd say direct your prayers to for everyday things.
How so?
Well, in some strands of Hindu thought, the creator, often identified as Brahma, is seen as the one who actually brought the gods themselves into existence.
Oh, interesting. So a step removed already.
Exactly. And then these gods, in turn, are sort of responsible for creating humanity. You get this tiered system, almost, with concepts like demigods, and of course, the famous Trinity. Brahma for creation, Vishnu for preservation, and Shiva for destruction or transformation. It's a more indirect line from the absolute top to us.
So instead of one direct line, creator to human, there are these layers of creation involved. That's definitely a different picture than maybe the standard Western model some people have.
Absolutely. And this leads to think about a very human-centered definition of God.
Okay, what does that look like?
Well, from our perspective, as beings looking for help or maybe connection, a god could be defined as basically any entity with immense power who is both capable of helping us and is actually aware that we exist.
Ah, that makes perfect sense when you put it like that. Because just having ultimate power doesn't automatically mean you're paying attention to, our little corner of the universe.
Right. Or even that you're necessarily benevolent. Power doesn't equal goodwill.
Or even awareness.
Exactly. And this resonates with, tons of ancient myths across different cultures, doesn't it? Where you have these incredibly powerful beings who might be shown as indifferent or unpredictable, maybe even actively hostile towards humans sometimes.
Yeah, true. It definitely challenges that automatic assumption that great power must mean inherent goodness or, like you said, even awareness of us.
It does.
Now, this is where it gets really interesting for me. The video talks about why Brahma, the creator figure in Hinduism, isn't as widely worshipped as, say, Vishnu or Shiva. Why is that?
It's a fascinating point. And the reasoning offered in the source is, well, it's quite sophisticated. The idea is that only the priestly class, the Brahmins, are traditionally thought to have a direct line, let's say, communication with Brahma.
Okay.
And there's this almost profound understanding behind it. The creator, having set the whole cosmic machine in motion, is best left undisturbed.
Undisturbed.
Yeah, it's like,
Oh.
you wouldn't keep calling the architect who designed the entire city just because you have a leaky faucet in your apartment.
Huh. That's a brilliant analogy. Don't bother the cosmic CEO with minor operational details.
Exactly. So instead, people might turn to Vishnu for help with preservation, stability, or Shiva for transformation, change, maybe even destruction of the old, these more actively involved deities.
The ones dealing with the day-to-day running of the universe, perhaps?
Sort of. Individuals might approach these other beings, the gods or demigods, for specific needs, specific outcomes, both, positive and maybe even what we'd see as negative, depending on the context.
So it's like a division of labor within the divine realm, tailored to different human concerns and interactions.
That's a good way to put it.
And this leads to just something quite thought-provoking, that the whole debate about many gods versus one god, maybe it isn't the most relevant question for an individual human's experience.
even though it's obviously shaped so much of human history and society.
Right. But from a personal standpoint.
The key point seems to be the distinction between the ultimate origin, the absolute source, and our personal connection or interaction. So, while the question of monotheism versus polytheism is, philosophically huge, from the perspective of someone just seeking meaning or help or understanding, who is accessible and responsive, might feel more immediately important than the exact count of ultimate creators.
That makes sense. He even mentions having admiration for figures like Vishnu or Shiva personally. He references Shiva's passionate nature, for instance.
Right. It's like appreciating different facets of existence, different energies or archetypes within this larger cosmic picture without necessarily contradicting a belief in one ultimate source.
It's about acknowledging and finding resonance with different aspects of the divine, perhaps.
Precisely. Even if you believe in a single ultimate source behind it all.
Okay, so the video then touches on this idea that humans were initially created. It references Vedic knowledge, preserved in Hindu tradition.
Yeah, with a sort of speculative note about its deep origins.
And there's a sense almost of a lost connection with that initial creator, that we don't often think about that original act anymore. It's like, it's faded.
Yes, and this is where the concept of Maya comes in, which the video mentions will be discussed later. Think of Maya as, well, often translated as illusion, but maybe more like a veil or distortion.
Okay.
Something that affects our perception of reality, potentially clouding our direct awareness of that original link to the creator. It's like a forgotten ancestral connection almost.
And this sets up a really interesting contrast with some spiritual teachers, like Lazarus mentioned in the source, who strongly encourage loving God.
Right. Because Injo Trip brings up a really relatable point here.
Which is,
how can you truly love someone or something you feel no real connection to, someone you don't really know on a personal level?
that's a very human point. It's hard to feel affection for a complete abstraction, isn't it?
It really is. And this leads to a suggestion in the video, kind of a simple meditation or focus point.
What's the suggestion?
It's about recognizing the creator, quite simply, as the one who initially brought each of us into being. You, me, everyone.
So regardless of the specific mechanism, whether it was, creation from scratch or through some kind of transcendence, like in certain Hindu views.
Exactly. The core idea is just acknowledging that fundamental origin point for our individual existence, that initial spark.
That's quite powerful in its simplicity.
It is.
Yeah.
And in the Hindu context, this connects to that really mind-bending concept of Brahma's day and night.
Oh, right. Explain that briefly.
The idea is that the entire universe, as we perceive it, it sort of dissolves or disappears when Brahma sleeps, enters a state of non-manifestation.
Wow.
And then it's re-manifested, restored
Yeah.
when Brahma wakes up. It really emphasizes the temporary or cyclical nature of our reality from that vast perspective.
It definitely shrinks your everyday worries when you consider that kind of cosmic timescale. Puts things in perspective.
Doesn't it just? The video also briefly touches on another huge question.
Yeah.
Whether the creator itself is mortal or immortal.
Whoa, okay. What's the thinking there?
Well, the logic presented, at least regarding Brahma as the first being in this universe cycle, it's quite intriguing.
Go on.
If someone is unborn, if they weren't born in the conventional sense, then logically, how can they die?
Interesting point. Unborn means undying.
That's the line of reasoning explored. It frames mortality versus immortality more as a point of philosophical discussion, rather than a definitively settled fact for all traditions.
Right, it's complex. Then the discussion shifts a bit, bringing in the perspective of followers of Krishna.
Yes, who emphasize the absolute necessity of having a relationship with Krishna, seen as the supreme personality of Godhead.
And what's the core idea there?
The principle is, essentially, that if your connection at the highest, most fundamental level of your relationship with Krishna is right, is harmonious, then all other aspects of your life, all your other relationships, will naturally fall into alignment. It's a kind of top-down approach to spiritual well-being and order.
Get the source right, and the rest follows.
That's the essence of it.
Solera mentions appreciating the depth of this idea, but he also expresses some reservations. He mentions something about perceiving propaganda within their writings.
Yeah, it's a good reminder, isn't it? That even really valuable insights or profound philosophies can be framed or presented in ways that might not resonate universally, or might feel overly pushy to some.
True. Which brings us back to a very human, very understandable question that the video raises.
Which is,
why should we feel love or even connection towards this distant creator when our actual daily lives are often so difficult.
Ah, yes, the problem of suffering.
Exactly. Hardship, money worries, illness, getting old, death, all that stuff. It's a valid struggle to reconcile faith or connection with the harsh realities we face.
It absolutely is. And the video suggests that focusing only on those difficulties can maybe create a somewhat narrow viewpoint. It also mentions that Gautama's teachings, which tackle these issues head-on, are planned for another discussion.
So, hinting at a broader conversation about the human condition and how different paths address it.
Exactly. But importantly, the video does offer a different way to think about loving the Creator, right here and now.
Okay, what's the alternative angle?
It's about acknowledging that the Creator is the origin point, not just of you, but of everyone you care about, your parents, your kids, your partner, your friends.
Ah, extending that sense of shared origin.
Yes, and even, interestingly, those you might dislike or consider enemies. It's a very inclusive perspective.
Right, suggesting a common source for almost all beings. It does note, though, an exception for, like, religious Satanism as a consciously separate path or choice.
Acknowledging agency, yes. Yeah. And this leads to a really simple, yet maybe profound suggestion for cultivating that love or connection.
It is.
To try and see the Creator as a kind of universal Our Father figure, the ultimate parent, if you will, encompassing everyone.
Yourself, your loved ones.
And even people you admire from afar, maybe artists, composers, thinkers, anyone who brings beauty or insight into the world. Seeing them all as stemming from that same initial creative act.
That's a lovely thought. And it connects directly to what the video calls a kind of revelation about worship.
Yes, the idea that what we truly deeply admire, that's essentially what we worship.
Explain that a bit more.
So even if you intensely appreciate, say, a musician's skill or an artist's vision, the video suggests you're indirectly valuing the source of that creativity, the inspiration behind it, which hints back towards the Creator.
So the things you're most drawn to, the qualities you find most compelling or beautiful in others, or in art or nature.
They might actually be clues about your own deepest values and maybe even a subtle form of connection to that fundamental creative force itself.
Interesting. So appreciating perfection or striving for it.
Exactly. The idea is that by appreciating excellence, beauty, skill, joy, in any field, really, art, science, culture, sports, whatever, brings that sense of wonder or upliftment.
You're connecting.
You are, in a way, connecting with and honoring that underlying creative impulse, and also honoring those who channel it, the co-creators, as the video suggests.
It acknowledges there are more complex, maybe dualistic areas, but maintains this idea of a primary originating force.
Right, a source behind the inspiration.
This then leads naturally into the idea of activating our own potential, our own spiritual or divine nature.
And the video defines this quite practically, actually. Not as something mystical necessarily, but as the power, the omnipotence within our own sphere of competence.
Our area of expertise, like being really good at your job or your craft.
Exactly, that feeling of mastery, of competence, of being able to affect change and create within your own domain. It's about recognizing and cultivating our own potential within this created world.
And this ties back, doesn't it, to a previous idea mentioned in the series about adjusting your worldview.
Yes, precisely. The importance of adjusting your internal settings, your worldview, to foster personal well-being and find a sense of purpose. It's about taking ownership of your experience within the larger cosmic setup.
Taking responsibility for your own tuning, as the video puts it elsewhere.
Right, and the video even briefly touches on the idea of being useful to other people as a potential future topic, highlighting the practical outward-facing results of this internal shift.
Okay, so we've circled back really to the initial question, creator or God?
Yep, and the conclusion presented in the source isn't a simple, it's this one answer.
No single definition fits all.
Pretty much. It concludes there isn't one definitive answer that satisfies every perspective or tradition, but what is suggested as essential
is orienting ourselves towards the concept of the creator as the fundamental source.
Exactly. As the origin of the existing world and everyone and everything in it, it acknowledges other theological distinctions like begotten versus created, but wisely kind of avoids getting too bogged down in those.
Because they can become very anthropomorphic, very human-centric interpretations.
Potentially, yeah, trying to fit vast concepts into narrow human boxes.
There's also that really interesting analogy offered near the end.
Ah, the business one.
Yeah, thinking of the creator as, like, managing the entire universe, this vast, vast operation.
Like a cosmic CEO running a massive, intricate business.
And us humans, we're more like tourists, or maybe occasional participants dropping in on this grand operation.
It definitely gives you a sense of scale, doesn't it? And perspective. It
Mhm.
suggests our immediate personal concerns might not always be the central focus of that ultimate creative force. We're part of something much, much bigger.
For sure. The video also acknowledges, logically, that there could potentially be countless gods, defined in that earlier sense.
Right. As potentially infinite numbers of omnipotent or very powerful beings throughout the cosmos.
But it advises against a purely transactional approach, right? Like just trying to bargain with these beings for personal gain.
Yes, it echoes Gautama Buddha's emphasis on self-reliance, on looking within.
Okay, how does Buddha fit into this?
Well, the video clarifies that Buddha's teaching was fundamentally non-theistic, which doesn't necessarily mean denying the existence of gods or powerful beings, but stressing that humans can, and perhaps should, solve their own fundamental problems. Through inner work, through the tuning of mindset, worldview, and practices, not by solely relying on external powers.
So it connects back to that theme of personal agency and responsibility that runs through the series.
Exactly. The primary task, as outlined, is realizing our own human potential, building on those initial steps discussed in earlier deep dives.
Cultivating our own capabilities within this reality we find ourselves in.
That seems to be the core message distilled from this particular source.
Okay. So as we start to wrap up this deep dive into, well, the nuances of creator versus God, inspired by ASI's video, thanks for joining us, everyone, in exploring this.
It's been fascinating to unpack.
For me, I think the key takeaway is, well, the distinction is subtle. It really depends on your viewpoint, your tradition. But just considering the concept of an initial fundamental creator offers a really useful foundational lens.
A way to understand our existence, maybe, our starting point.
Yeah. And it leaves us with a final thought, something for you, our listener, to maybe mull over.
What's that?
Consider the implications. What if you viewed those moments of admiration, those sparks of joy you feel when encountering beauty or excellence? What if you saw them as subtle forms of connection
Connection to what?
to the ultimate source of all creation? How might that shift your perspective on your everyday experiences, maybe, and on the things you truly value?
Hmm. That's definitely something to ponder. Viewing appreciation is a kind of spiritual practice, almost.
Maybe. So we encourage you to keep pondering these ideas, keep exploring, and feel free to share any insights or further questions that come up for you.
Absolutely. Always good to continue the conversation.
Until our next deep dive, keep that curiosity alive.